The church at Ashworth Crossing held 200 souls on its best Sunday, and on the morning of the 23rd of October in the year 1814 it held 240, because the living always come in greater numbers when the dead offer a scandal to be observed. 2 coffins stood before the altar. The first was of polished mahogany with brass fittings, and it contained Mr. Cobbogen. Gerald Ashworth, aged 51, landowner of Ashworth Park, former captain of the county militia, dead of a riding accident on the South Road 6 days past. The second coffin was of somewhat plainer construction, and it contained his younger brother, Mr. Robert Ashworth, aged 43, who had died of the same accident in the same ditch on the same morning, having ridden out with Gerald at first light on business he had not troubled to name to anyone. The widow occupied the front pew. She was a slight woman of 27 in full black crepe, a mourning cap pinned correctly over dark hair, black gloved hands folded in her lap, and a small jet brooch at her collarbone that caught no light because jet never does. She sat very still. Her eyes were open. They were gray-green, the color of the Thames on an overcast morning, and they were dry. This was the fact the congregation had come to witness, or rather, the fact the congregation had come to confirm. Rumor had preceded the service by 3 days. The widow had not wept at the laying out. The widow had not wept in the chapel at Ashworth Park when the coffins were brought in. And now, here, in the church that had received every Ashworth christening and burial for 2 centuries, the widow sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes dry as bone, and the watching assembly drew its collective breath. Edmund Cavendish, Viscount Ashmore, sat 4 rows behind her. He had come because Gerald Ashworth had been his neighbor for 11 years, and because the forms of the county demanded his presence. He had arrived early, taken his pew, and spent the better part of the service watching the back of Helena Ashworth's head. He could not see her face. He could see the set of her shoulders. He could see the way her hands did not move. Not once. Not even when the vicar named both brothers in a single breath and a quiet sob moved through the women around her like wind through grass. He could see that she did not flinch, and that she did not perform not flinching. She was simply present. Still as a person who has finished waiting for something and found, on the other side of it, not relief and not grief, but only the strange, open quiet of an ended thing. He had seen that quality once before in a man stepping off a ship after a long campaign. He had not expected to see it in a woman at her husband's funeral. The service concluded. The congregation filed out into the gray October light. Helena Ashworth walked behind the coffins, with her hands at her sides, her chin level, and her eyes on the middle distance. Mrs. Prentice, a house guest of Lady Dorothea's from Bath, leaned toward her hostess as the 2 women preceded Edmund through the church door. "She bears herself with such composure, Mrs." Prentice said, in the particular tone that means the opposite of what the words say. Lady Dorothea's fan rose a precise 1/4 inch. "She is what she has always been," she said quietly. "The cold widow. The county will not soon forget it." Edmund heard both sentences. He said nothing. He watched her cross the churchyard gravel without looking left or right, and he did not look away until she was inside the carriage, and the door was closed behind her. Helena had been married to Gerald Ashworth for 8 years, and she could count on the fingers of one hand the morning she had woken in those 8 years without a specific and accurate knowledge of what the day would cost her. She had come to the marriage at 19, the second daughter of a Shropshire clergyman, whose small estate had been sold the year of her mother's death, the proceeds divided between debts and her elder brother's living expenses. Her father had been a kind man and a poor one, and his death when she was 18 had left her with a small annuity, a trunk of books, and the social machinery of the county pressing her toward a resolution. Gerald Ashworth had been the resolution. He was 33, recently widowed himself, possessed of a substantial estate, and desirous of a second wife who would manage his household, entertain his guests, and produce, if Providence permitted, an heir to interrupt the entail that ran the property toward his brother Robert in the event of his death without legitimate issue. Helena had understood the terms, She had married him with clear eyes and no illusions, because clear eyes and no illusions were what her father had left her in place of a dowry. The marriage had been, in the language of the drawing room, perfectly suitable. In the language of the kitchen passage at 11:30 on a winter night, when Helena sat with the housekeeper going over the week's accounts because Gerald would not keep an estate manager and would not allow her to rest until the ledgers balanced, it had been the longest 8 years of her life. Gerald Ashworth was not a cruel man. She had told herself this on many mornings, and believed it on most. He was a man who required order, who required compliance, who required that his household be a mirror of his own preferences, and who had no interest in the woman inside it, beyond her management of its surfaces. She had been his steward and his hostess and his representative in the county's social rounds, and in return he had provided the practical security that the alternative to marriage never would have. She had not expected happiness. She had not expected to be seen. She had expected to endure, and she had endured. And now the enduring was over. She had learned, in the first 6 months of marriage, the precise register in which Gerald wished to be addressed at breakfast, and the precise register in which he wished to be addressed at dinner. And these were different registers, and the difference between them was navigable only if she kept a careful accounting of his mood, his business, the weather, and the last letter received from his solicitor. She had learned that he did not wish to be asked about the estate's accounts, unless he raised the subject, that he did not wish to be informed of the tenants' difficulties, unless they rose to the level of legal complaint, and that he did not wish to know that the east wing roof had developed a slow leak in November until she had already arranged for its repair. She had learned to be invisibly useful, and she had learned this so thoroughly that after 8 years she was not certain she could be visibly present without some effort of will that felt uncomfortably like performance. What she had not learned, and what Robert had spent years trying to teach her by less gentle means, was how to be afraid in the right direction. She had been afraid of the wrong things he had implied on more than one occasion. She had been afraid of Gerald's cold displeasure, of Lady Dorothea's polished assessments, of the county's collective memory for a woman who had arrived without distinction and was expected to disappear into distinction's shadow. She had not been sufficiently afraid of Robert, who was patient and who was calculating, and who had a great deal of time in which to wait for Gerald's health to decline. She had not killed either of them. She wanted to note this in the interior courtroom, where she had been conducting her own trial since the morning the horses came back without their riders. She had not killed them, and she had not wished them dead, which was a different and more careful accounting. She had wished on some mornings in the small hours for the situation to end. Situations end in various ways. This one had ended on the South Road at first light, and she had not been responsible for it. And she held this knowledge like the jet brooch, as a small cold fact that was becoming warm. Robert Ashworth had been another matter. Where Gerald was cold by temperament, Robert was cold by calculation. He had understood from the first months of the marriage that Helena's position at Ashworth Park depended entirely on Gerald's continued goodwill, and he had made it a secondary occupation to ensure that goodwill stayed conditional. A word in Gerald's ear about a household decision she had made, a letter to Lady Dorothea that framed Helena's management as overreach, a suggestion, twice voiced directly to Helena herself, that if she failed to produce an heir and Gerald's attention wandered, Robert's position as heir presumptive would be considerably more comfortable without a widowed sister-in-law complicating the household's future. She had never told anyone. There was no one to tell. And now both men were in the earth, and the county thought her cold for not weeping. And Helena found she could not summon the energy to explain that there are some griefs that have been grieved so thoroughly across so many years that when the occasion arrives for the world to witness them, there is nothing left. She wore the jet brooch because her mother had given it to her on the morning of her wedding, pressing it into her palm with both hands, and saying only that every Pelham woman who had worn it had come through. She did not know precisely what coming through would look like. She suspected it would not look the way the county expected grief to look. Lady Dorothea Ashworth had come to the house 3 days before the funeral and had not left. She was 58. Gerald and Robert's mother, a woman who had organized her entire life around the proposition that the Ashworth name was a thing to be protected rather than merely used, and who had viewed Helena's installation as mistress of Ashworth Park as a mild and temporary concession to her elder son's needs. Lady Dorothea had her own dower house a mile from the estate, and her own opinions about how the estate ought to be managed, and she shared both freely. On the morning after the funeral, she convened the household staff in the entrance hall and redistributed 2 of Helena's standing household orders without consulting her. On the afternoon of the same day, she received callers in the blue drawing room, which had always been Helena's receiving room, and sent word to Helena that she would not be needed. Helena was sitting in the library when Mrs. Alcott, the housekeeper, found her. "She has sent Miss Haverstock's trunks to the Rose Room, ma'am," Mrs. Alcott said. Her expression was carefully neutral in the way of a woman delivering information that troubles her. "Miss Haverstock," Helena said. "Lady Dorothea's cousin's daughter from Hertfordshire. She arrived this morning on the 7 o'clock coach." Helena set down her book. "Very well," she said. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that she had known this campaign would begin before the crepe was aired. It was on the afternoon of the 3rd day, as Helena crossed the lower corridor toward the conservatory, that she encountered Edmund for the first time since the funeral. He was standing near the hall table, his hat in his hand. Clearly just admitted and not yet received. When she came around the corner, he did not step aside. He looked at her with the particular quality of attention that she had noticed in the church, the attention of a man who was not performing observation but actually engaged in it. "Mrs. Ashworth," he said, "I came to inquire after your health." It was a formality. She understood it as a formality. "You are kind, my lord," she said. "I am direct," he said, correcting her mildly, "which is a different quality, and often mistaken for the first." He paused. "You look as a woman looks who has not slept in 3 days, and will not admit it." She felt something shift in her chest, not warmth, exactly. The recognition of being seen, which is not the same thing, but is closer to it than most experiences she had been offered recently.
"I sleep adequately,"
she said.
"Eat something,"
he said. "Before you receive anyone else's guests in your own house." He placed a slight stress on the last 3 words that told her he had noted the situation. Then he asked for Lady Dorothea, was shown to the drawing room, and left Helena standing in the corridor, with the instructions settling over her like something that had been there before she heard it. If you are still here watching this story take shape, leave a thought in the comments when you finish. Now stay with Helena, because the worst of it has not arrived yet. The will was read on the 5th day. Mr. Grantham, the family solicitor, arrived from London on the morning coach, a thin man of 60 in a brown coat, who had served the Ashworth family for 31 years, and who had, in Helena's experience, the quality of furniture that disapproves of you. He set his papers on the dining-room table, accepted a cup of tea, and at 2 o'clock in the afternoon assembled the relevant parties: Lady Dorothea, Miss Haverstock, the estate steward, Mr. Fenwick, and Helena. The will itself was unsurprising. The estate, the house, and the bulk of the income passed under the existing entail to the next male heir, which, Robert being dead, meant a distant cousin in Northumberland who had not yet been notified. The household effects, the horses, and the lesser investments were distributed among various relations in the manner of a man who had been advised by his solicitor to distribute them, and had done so without particular feeling. Then Mr. Dyer. Grantham unfolded a second paper. "There is a codicil," he said, "executed by Mr. Ashworth 14 months past." He read it in the monotone of a man delivering a document rather than its meaning. The codicil stated that in the event of Mr. Breek Ashworth's death, the jointure set aside for his wife under the marriage settlement, £400 per annum, was to be withheld in the event that the trustees of the estate determined she had failed to fulfill the spirit of the marital compact, as evidenced by. Here, Mr. Firse, Grantham paused over the phrasing, demonstrated coldness and a consistent failure of wifely warmth and duty, said determination to rest with Lady Dorothea Ashworth as primary trustee. He looked up from the paper. The room was very quiet. "The cold widow," Lady Dorothea said, not loudly but not softly either. She was looking at Helena with the expression of a woman who has waited 14 months for a document to arrive and is gratified to find it intact. "The county has named you correctly, it seems, and my son had the foresight to agree." Mr. Grantham cleared his throat. "The codicil further specifies that Mrs. Ashworth is to vacate the property within a period of 14 days from the date of the will's reading, she being, in the codicil's language, a dependent of the estate rather than a principal." Helena heard the words. She sat with them. She felt no surprise, which was its own kind of answer to a question she had not been asking. She had known, without evidence until this moment, that something of this shape had been prepared. Gerald's last winter had included a series of consultations with Mr. Grantham that he had not troubled to explain. She had assumed it was the estate's affairs. "It had been, I understand," she said. Her voice was level. Around the table, no one quite met her eyes except Lady Dorothea, who met them with the confidence of a woman who has won the game she came to play. Outside the dining-room window, October rain had begun on the gravel. That night, Helena sat in the library with her account book and worked out what she had. The small annuity from her father's estate, still intact, would yield £60 per annum. Her personal effects, her clothing, her books, the few pieces of jewelry she had brought to the marriage, rather than received within it, her brother William's household in Shropshire, where she had not visited in 4 years, and where she would be a dependent presence in a house not her own. She sat with these numbers for a long time, and then she set them aside and did the one thing she could actually do before the 14 days expired. She pulled on her warmest shawl and went to find Mr. Fenwick. The estate's autumn seed stores had not been allocated to the tenant farms. It was a task Gerald had always meant to assign and had never managed before the accident, and with the estate now in the hands of an absentee heir in Northumberland, no one had thought to attend to it. Helena spent 2 hours with Fenwick, going through the ledgers, divided the stores equitably among the 7 tenant families, drafted the relevant letters in her own hand, and arranged for the delivery to begin the following morning. If she was to leave in 14 days, the tenants would at least go into winter with their planting secured. She was in the kitchen garden at first light, checking that the first of the deliveries had been correctly loaded, when she became aware that someone was standing at the garden gate. He had arrived without announcement, without his hat, with mud on his boots that suggested he had come across the lower fields rather than by the road. He stood at the gate for a moment, watching her direct the loading of a cart with the kind of attention he seemed to give everything, which was the attention of a man actually looking rather than performing the gesture of it. She straightened. "My lord, I heard about the codicil," he said. "The county moves quickly. Mr. Grantham is an old acquaintance of my steward's. He came through the gate and stopped the proper distance from her." The morning was cold and gray, and his breath showed in the air. She was aware that she had soil on her gloves, and that her shawl was the plain wool one, rather than anything presentable, and that this awareness was the habit of 8 years presenting itself in a context where it was not, she decided, relevant. "What are you doing?" she told him. "The seed stores, the tenant farms, the deliveries." He listened without interrupting, which was not common, and when she finished he was quiet for a moment. "You are leaving in a fortnight," he said, "and your first action on the estate's behalf is to secure the tenants' winter planting." "Someone ought to," she said. "The heir in Northumberland will not know to think of it." He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was level, and his eyes were the color of deep water in this light, a dark hazel that the morning made nearly brown. There was something in his expression that she did not know how to read, because she had so little practice reading expressions that were not performing something for an audience. She had noticed his attention in the church. She had put it aside then because grief, or its absence, was not a moment for noticing a man across a church. She had noticed it again in the corridor, and again she had put it aside. Because 3 days after a funeral is not a moment, either. And because she had developed a practiced competence at setting aside things that were not hers to think about. She was becoming aware, standing in the kitchen garden in the gray light with soil on her gloves, that she was running low on suitable reasons to continue setting it aside. She did not do anything with this awareness. She held it as she held most things she was not ready to name, which was carefully, with both hands, and at a slight distance from the surface of her face. "My first wife," he said quietly, which was not what she expected, "died in the 2nd year of our marriage. She had been ill from the beginning, I had known it, and married her anyway, because I believed love was equal to the situation. It was not." He paused. "I spent 3 years afterward believing that the failure of love to be equal to the situation was a deficiency in me, rather than a fact of physics. By the time I understood the difference, I had applied the same theory to everything in my life, and found everything lacking." She did not speak. The garden was very still around them, the cart loaded, the groom waiting at a distance. "My point," he said, "is that I know what it looks like when a person has been grieving a thing long before the world gives them permission to." She looked at him. She felt the jet brooch at her collarbone, a small, cold weight that had been warm from her skin for days now. "I am not grieving," she said. "No," he said, "you are finished grieving," which is entirely different, and which the county will spend the next year not understanding. He looked at the cart. "Go inside. It is too cold for you out here without a coat." She went inside. She did not know what to make of him. She knew what her body made of him, which was a warmth at the sternum that had no business being there, and that she resented because it would serve her poorly, and had arrived at the worst possible time. She pressed her hand against the jet brooch through her shawl, and told herself it was the cold. By the 8th day, Lady Dorothea had begun receiving callers in the main rooms of Ashworth Park, as though she were already reinstalled as its mistress. Miss Haverstock, who was 22 and well-coached and wore a great deal of pink, had attached herself to Lady Dorothea's program, and was to be seen at meals and at the tea table with the ease of someone being auditioned for a role she expected to be offered shortly. Edmund called twice more that week. Once he arrived with a book he said he had meant to return to Gerald's library for years, which was untrue, and both of them knew it. And once he arrived at the hour when Lady Dorothea received callers, sat in the blue drawing-room for 20 minutes in a way that reorganized the room's social dynamics without a single overt act, and left. He did not say anything particular to Helena on either occasion. He watched her. His body tracked her position in a room in the way that people's bodies track things they are trying to decide about. On the evening of the 9th day, as she was crossing the upper gallery after dinner, she heard Lady Dorothea's voice from the sitting room below, carrying clearly through the partially open door. "She has never been appropriate to the position, even the servants say it. Mrs. Alcott is loyal to her, but the others know what she is." A pause. "A cold widow from the start. My son saw it in the end, and thank heaven he had the foresight to protect the estate's interest before the accident took him." The voice that answered was Miss Haverstock's. "It must be a comfort, Lady Dorothea, that things are being set right." Helena stood in the gallery for a moment. Then she walked on. The evening after that, she wrote to William. She told him she would require a room for the winter, that she would contribute what she could from the annuity, and that she was sorry to arrive as a difficulty. She sealed the letter and left it on the hall table for the morning post. Then she went back to her room and sat with her hands in her lap and told herself that this was not defeat, that she had endured 8 years of something she had not chosen and had come through it intact, and that going to William's house was the next enduring, and she would manage it as she had managed everything else, without display and without apology. She did not quite believe it. Her hands were cold and the room was dark, and the jet brooch lay on the dressing table where she had set it before dinner, and she looked at it for a long time. It was the following morning that Mr. Selientime. Grantham arrived again, earlier than expected. With a second document, he had been sent by Lady Dorothea, who had been in correspondence with the Northumberland heir, a Mr. Godden. Percival Dashwood, aged 19, who had instructed his solicitor to act according to Lady Dorothea's guidance in all matters of the estate's management, pending his formal assumption of ownership. The second document was a letter from Mr. Coffins, Dashwood authorizing Lady Dorothea to take immediate occupancy of the main house pending the transfer of the estate, and naming Miss Haverstock as a household guest to be accommodated during that period. It also noted, in Mr. Epting Grantham's careful phrasing, that the 14-day period for Mrs. Ashworth's departure was to be shortened by order of the estate's trustees to 7 days, given certain concerns about the estate's household accounts. Helena was in the library when Mr. Grantham presented this document to her. She read it twice. Then she set it on the desk. "The accounts are in order," she said. "They have been in order for 8 years. The trustees have expressed a concern," Mr. Grantham said. He did not look at her directly. She understood then that this was not a legal matter, it was a choreographed one. And she understood something else, that she could comply. Quietly. In the manner of a woman who had always been quiet, and be in William's carriage in 4 days' time, and that would be the end of it. Or she could do something else, which she had not yet identified, but which she felt somewhere behind her sternum as a thing that had not yet declared its shape. She stood. She said, "Thank you to Mr. Shade Grantham," which she did not mean but which was true to form, and she went to find Mrs. Alcott. Then Lord Ashmore arrived. He came in the afternoon, which was not his usual hour, and he came without his steward and without the pretext of a returned book. Mrs. Alcott showed him to the entrance hall. Helena met him there because she had no drawing-room left that she could call her own without the situation being a performance of confidence she was not certain she could sustain. "Grantham visited this morning," he said. "Word travels. Mrs. Alcott sent to me." He looked at her steadily. There was something different in his expression, or rather something that had stopped being obscured. She had the sensation she sometimes had looking at a river in the moment the surface goes clear and you can see the depth. "I would like to ask you something, and I would like you to hear the whole of it before you answer." "I am listening," she said. He was quiet for a moment. His hands were still at his sides. The entrance hall was cold with the afternoon light coming in gray and flat through the high windows, and somewhere in the house she could hear Lady Dorothea's voice from the blue drawing-room. "I have a house," he said, "that is too large for one person, and has been so for 6 years. I have a steward who manages it well, and tenants who are adequate, and a conservatory that no one uses. I have not been happy in it, which is not the house's fault. I believe I have not been happy in it because I made the decision after my wife died that happiness was a poor goal for a man of sense and that useful equilibrium was better, and that I would pursue nothing beyond useful equilibrium for the remainder of whatever years I was given." He stopped. His jaw was set. "I have been reconsidering that decision for approximately 9 days. She said nothing. Her heart was doing something, her face was not doing, which was the condition of her life reduced to its essentials. "What I am asking," he said, "is whether you would consent to become the Viscountess Ashmore, not as an arrangement of convenience, though I am aware the timing makes it look like nothing else, and I cannot remedy that. Not as a solution to the codicil or the 7-day notice or Lady Dorothea's maneuvering." He paused. "As a choice. Because I have been in this county for 11 years, and in that time there is only one person whose quality I have consistently recognized, and whose position has consistently outraged me. And it is time I did something with that recognition beyond stand in kitchen gardens." She looked at him. She felt the brooch at her collarbone which she had put on this morning without thinking, because she had been putting it on every morning. And habit is the last thing you notice when everything else is moving. "You are asking me now," she said, "because Grantham was here this morning." "I am asking you now," he said, "because I should have asked you 3 days ago, and I did not, and I am not willing to let another day go by on the same terms." She was aware that her hands were perfectly still, and that this was something she had trained rather than something she felt. She was aware that what she felt was quite different from still. She was aware that she had spent 8 years in a house where being seen was a thing that happened to other people, and that she was being seen now, and that her body did not quite know what to do with it, except receive it, very quietly, like water into dry ground. "Yes," she said. I will. It was the morning of the 12th day when Lady Dorothea convened what she intended to be the final scene. She had assembled Mr. Grantham, Miss Haverstock, 2 house guests, and the estate steward, Mr. Fenwick, in the blue drawing room at 10 o'clock, with the stated purpose of reviewing the household's management transition. The secondary purpose, which no one named, was to complete Helena's displacement in a room full of witnesses who would carry the account of it into the county's conversation for the season to come. Helena was present because she had been summoned and because she had chosen to come. She was standing near the window when the door opened and Lord Ashmore walked in. He had not been invited. He had not sent word. He came in with his hat under his arm, and his coat absolutely correct, and his face wearing the expression of a man who has made a decision and is not reconsidering it, and he stopped in the middle of the room where everyone could see him. Lady Dorothea turned from her position near the fireplace. Her fan rose. "My Lord Ashmore," she said, "we were not expecting you, I am aware," he said. He did not look at Lady Dorothea long. His eyes moved to Helen at the window, held for a moment, then returned to the room at large, with the precision of a man placing his attention where it is useful. "I am here to inform you that I have made an offer of marriage to Mrs. Pellis Ashworth, which she has accepted, and that the announcement will be carried to the county by the end of the week." The room was very still. Mr. Grantham's pen stopped. Miss Haverstock's expression did something that it recovered from quickly, but not quite quickly enough. Lady Dorothea's fan descended a half-inch. "That is a matter," she said carefully, "for Mrs. Beer, Ashworth's family and legal representatives, and I am not certain this is the appropriate moment to discuss it." "She is under my protection," Edmund said. "I will hear nothing further regarding the codicil, the 7-day notice, or the management of Ashworth Park's accounts. 12 words level, not loud. The words of a man who does not require volume because the rank and the intention are both entirely legible without it." Lady Dorothea stood with her fan at the wrong angle, which was the only visible sign. Her mouth opened and produced no sound for a full 3 seconds, which was unusual for her. She looked for the first time since the funeral like a woman who has arrived at the edge of the script. She was given and found no further lines. Mr. Grantham cleared his throat. He was a solicitor of 31 years' experience, and he knew when a document's authority had been superseded by a simpler force. Miss Haverstock looked at her hands. Edmund crossed the room to Helena's side. He did not touch her. He stood beside her at the window, his shoulder a precise distance from hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold morning air. Lady Dorothea made one more attempt. "The terms of the codicil stand regardless of any subsequent arrangement," she said. "It was Gerald's wish." "Gerald's wish," Edmund said, with a quietness that was not gentle, "was executed by a man who spent 14 months planning the management of a woman he had spent 8 years failing to see. I hold the county in no ill will. I am not interested in the terms of that document." He looked at Helena. She looked back at him. The room around them was perfectly silent. She felt the brooch at her collarbone. The small, cold weight of it had gone warm. If Helena's story has moved you, take a moment before you go. What she held on to through 8 years of invisibility was not hope exactly. It was the quiet certainty that the world's verdict was not the final one. Leave a thought in the comments if you found your way to the end. The announcement appeared in the county paper on the Friday, and by the Saturday, Lady Dorothea had returned to her dower house, and Miss Haverstock had departed for Hertfordshire on the morning coach. Mr. Fenwick oversaw the transfer of the household's management to the heir in Northumberland, with, Helena noted, a particular thoroughness in his documentation of the tenant accounts, which were impeccable and would remain so. Helena spent her last morning at Ashworth Park in the library, not packing, because her things had been packed already by Mrs. Alcott, with the efficiency of a woman who approves of an outcome. She sat in the chair by the window where she had spent most of the past 8 years reading, and she looked at the room, and she did not grieve it. It had been a good library. It had been the one room in the house that was consistently hers. Not by Gerald's permission, but by habit, and by neglect. She did not grieve the room, and she did not grieve the house, and she was not sorry, which she had given herself permission to be honest about. She took only the books she had brought to the marriage, her accounts book, and the jet brooch. Viscount Ashmore's house was 4 miles from Ashworth Park by road, and 2 across the lower fields, and Helena learned this distance in the first weeks, the way you learn a house you did not choose, and then find yourself choosing, by its smells and its corners and the quality of its light at different hours. The conservatory was indeed unused, and it was also large and south-facing and badly in need of someone to organize it, which she began on the 2nd week of November, with the assistance of a baffled but accommodating undergardener. Edmund was not an easy man, by which she meant he was not the kind of man whose company requires no effort, which she was grateful for because she was not the kind of woman whose company requires no effort, and she had spent 8 years performing effortlessness and found it exhausting. He had opinions about the estate that were not always right. She had opinions about the estate that were sometimes more right, and that she had learned, slowly, to voice, and that he had learned not much more slowly to hear. He did not give her the house all at once. He gave it to her the way a person gives a house to someone who has not had one, which is to say, 1 room at a time, by small accretions of invitation. The library first, because he noticed where she gravitated on the 2nd morning, and thereafter simply left books on the table there that he knew she had not yet read. Then the morning room, where he began leaving her letters on the side table as a matter of course, as though the arrangement had always existed. Then, by the 3rd week, the conservatory, which he claimed no particular attachment to, but which he visited every day once she had begun working in it, on the theory, never stated but entirely legible, that a room she was in was a room worth being in. She noticed this. She let herself notice it, which was itself a change, the deliberate choice not to set aside what was hers to think about. In December, 3 weeks before Christmas, she was in the conservatory, arranging the last of the winter bulbs when he came to find her. He stood in the doorway for a moment in the way he had stood at the kitchen garden gate, and she thought that she would remember that quality of his attention for the rest of her life, because it was the quality of someone for whom looking was an act rather than a posture. He came in and stood beside her at the planning table, and she could feel the warmth of him in the cool, damp air of the conservatory, the same warmth she had felt at the window of the blue drawing-room at Ashworth Park, closer now and permitted. "You are getting soil on the table," he observed. "I am planting bulbs," she said. "Soil on the table is the expected outcome." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, which was the closest he came to a smile in those early weeks, and which she had learned was worth more than most people's laughter. She set down the bulb she was holding and turned to look at him, and he was already looking at her. She reached up and touched the jet brooch at her collarbone, and then, because she could, she unclasped it and held it on her open palm between them. "My mother gave me this the morning of my wedding," she said. "She told me every Pelham woman who wore it came through." He looked at it in her hand. He did not say anything. "I am coming through," she said. It was not a question. His hand came up and his fingers closed around hers, and the brooch, warm now from her skin and from his, was between their joined hands in the gray December light of the conservatory. "You are," he said. Outside the windows, the first snow of winter had begun on the fields of Ashmore Park, and the bare trees held the light, and she was home.